conference. I'm going to go around just so you can, there are a couple folks here in the room. I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, this is Caitlin Slayer with the National Housing Conference.
Mike Spots with Enterprise Community Partners.
Mike is going to be Mike and John Hersey, who is also on the line, are going to be presenting on their work on equitable transit-oriented development. Before we dive into that, we do have a few updates we wanted to share. So I'm going to turn it over to Caitlin to talk about appropriations.
So as I'm sure a lot of you have seen in the news lately, Congress last week passed a short-term continuing resolution that will fund the government through December 11th. Before December 11th, they'll need to pass a new one, otherwise the government will shut down. There's been a lot of news about that lately, and President Obama has said that he won't sign another short-term continuing resolution, wants a long-term budget negotiation. So there's a lot of uncertainty about what will happen with the government shutdown, and some other things that are happening are making this a little bit more tumultuous, with Speaker Boehner resigning, and tomorrow the House will hold, the GOP will hold a vote to elect their representative, and then a full chamber vote will be in late October. Also coming up, we've got the October 29th is when the trust fund, the highway trust fund, will run out, and November 5th is when the debt ceiling will be reached, and both of those will require congressional action. So we've just got a lot going on right now with the budget.
Thanks, Caitlin. And just we learned from Mike that they think they found enough money for the highway trust fund through June, but then they have to deal with it in an election year, so it's still a variable in the budget process to keep track of. The other thing I wanted to mention now, we learned about a HUD webinar that's coming up on October 21st from 1 to 3 p.m., and I will send out the information with the meeting notes. It will be a live broadcast from HUD. They're going to be speaking about their single-family loan sale program. They're looking to increase nonprofit participation. So they're going to describe the program, talk about how to get qualified to participate, the outcome and reporting requirements, and then have some Q&A and partners speaking about their experience. So good opportunity to learn more about that. So we'll share that information. The other thing we learned just today, I'm sure you've seen there's been some articles around FHFA and the duty to serve requirement. Rumor that we heard today was that duty to serve should be out within the next 30 days. So National Mortgage News had reported within the next 12 months. Our contact at FHFA says in the next 30 days. So whether that happens remains to be seen, but if it rolls out, there could be real potential there for neighborhood investment. So just something to keep an eye out for. So with that, we will switch it over to Mike and John. John, are you with us?
I'm still here. Hello, everyone.
Perfect. So let me pull up.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks to everyone for joining today. We're really excited to talk about our Promoting Opportunity Through Equitable Transit-Oriented Development Research Initiative, for ETOD for short. I'm just going to go through some of these slides pretty quickly in the interest of time to leave some time for questions and answers. But just to start with a quick look at the agenda. I'm going to start by talking about what we mean when we say ETOD, and so going through a review of some of the evidence base that supports the importance of ETOD. And then I'm going to pass the mic over to John, who will talk about some of the real-world barriers to achieving equitable TOD and some of the best practices for overcoming those barriers. Then we'll talk about next steps in our research project, and then hopefully have plenty of time for a broader discussion with the group. So when we refer to ETOD, we mean in this context compact, often mixed-use development with access to jobs, neighborhood-serving stores, and other amenities that also serves the needs of low and moderate income people. we believe a primary approach to supporting ETOD is the creation and preservation of affordable housing near transit. You'll notice in our definition that we don't refer to specific definitions for income targeting or for transit modes or level of service. And the reason for that is because every region is different, every community is different, and every neighborhood is different. And what we're really trying to get at is having accessible neighborhoods that are open to people at a range of incomes, and the specific needs and interventions in a given neighborhood may vary. So therefore, we don't call out specific targets. But I won't go into too much depth about ETOD challenges because that's going to be the focus of John's portion of the presentation. But I will say that it doesn't just happen, and that there are a number of barriers, many of which, such as high development costs or scarce subsidy resources, many of those are faced across the affordable housing development spectrum, regardless of transit orientation. But others are unique to ETOD, such as auto orientation in our development patterns and our zoning and land use policies, as well as the challenge of interdisciplinary coordination. We're bringing in the transportation sector, so we need to be able to talk with and communicate with and share goals with another field. So the public portion of this research was launched last April when at the Congress for New Urbanism conference, we released the first of 3 research products, Promoting Opportunity Through Equitable TOD, Making the Case. This is a review of the evidence base on the importance of equitable TOD, and we found that there were significant benefits for families, communities, and neighborhoods, and regions alike. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through that very significant evidence base, but I do want to highlight a few interesting pieces from that research. Let's start with individual households and families. We found significant evidence that ETOD can improve access to employment. It can lower the cost of living through lowering the combined cost of housing and transportation, which are 2 of the most expensive line items in the family budget generally. And it can contribute to improved health and well-being, both through providing enhanced access to healthcare and healthcare facilities, as well as encouraging walkable neighborhoods and more active lifestyles by having a more vibrant the physical characteristics of the neighborhood. And again, I won't get into some of the specific research on each of those points, but I do want to highlight the element of job access. And job access, as we all know, is crucial to opportunity. And job access is correlated with shorter periods of unemployment for low-income workers, according to some of the research we found. But unfortunately, there are some countervailing pressures. This issue is something that the Brookings Institution has done a significant amount of research on. The typical job is only accessible to approximately 27% of the metropolitan workforce within a 90-minute transit commute. And the 90-minute transit commute probably overstates the true accessibility of these jobs, because if you think about low-income earners who may have irregular schedules or hours, or they may have 2 jobs or need to be meeting child care, or, taking their kids to daycare or picking them up from school, that 90 minutes may become prohibitive very quickly. And the situation is actually getting worse. The Brookings Institution has found that from 2000 to 2012, the number of jobs within 90-minute transit commutes have decreased.
All right. So apologies again for that interruption, but thanks for dialing back in.
Yeah, thanks everyone for your patience. I'm not exactly sure where we dropped, so I'm going to I'm going to go back a slide and cover some of that ground just to make sure we didn't miss anything. So apologies for any redundancy. So in April, we released a case-making document for Equitable TOD at the Congress for New Urbanism conference. It includes a significant review of literature on the benefits of equitable TOD to families, neighborhoods and regions. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into too much detail, but I do want to highlight a few different data points. ETOD has very significant benefits to individual households and families. One of the most crucial benefits is the access to jobs and opportunities that transit can provide. Job access is correlated with better employment outcomes, and transit is a key means of providing that job access. Though only 27% of metropolitan workforce is accessible to the typical job within a 90-minute transit commute, that is likely overstating the true accessibility of these jobs, particularly for lower-income working households, because they may hold two jobs or have to balance daycare, pickups, and the like. That makes a 90-minute transit commute prohibitive in many circumstances. And the situation is getting worse. The Brookings Institution has done a significant amount of research on a related project on the suburbanization of poverty. Jobs are becoming more dispersed throughout metropolitan regions and in the suburbs, and as a result, from 2000 to 2012, fewer metropolitan jobs were accessible within a 90-minute transit commute, and poor and minority households had disproportionately lower access. So, it's pretty clear-cut what the benefits to households of equitable TOD can be. But what about society at large? We found an evidence base that supports the notion that ETOD is supportive of a more efficient transportation network, that it can contribute to the local and regional economy, that it can strengthen municipal finances, and that it can promote environmental resilience. Again, in the interest of time, I'm only going to touch on a few data points to illustrate this. But let's focus on the transportation system, because if we're going to make the case for affordable housing near transit and ETOD, we need a strong transportation sector partner. So therefore, we need to demonstrate that this is not, even though it does have equity benefits, that it also has positive bottom line benefits for the transit agency. And one of the things that you want to make sure you're doing as a transit agency is ensuring that you are connecting your service to your core ridership. And there's a significant body of evidence that shows that low-income households are more likely to ride transit. The chart from the research that you see on your screen illustrates that families earning 80% or less of median family income are more likely to ride transit than higher-income families, regardless of the neighborhood typology. There's also been separate research from Denver that show that low-income residents in station areas use transit as their primary commute mode more than twice as often as any other income group. So we want to make sure that we are connecting our transit assets to our core transit users. And we can do that by supporting affordable housing and preservation near transit, and in many cases that may be a necessary step because neighborhoods change. There's a significant body of evidence that shows that there are substantial neighborhood changes when new transit service, particularly rail transit service, is added to a community. The chart that you see here is from the Dukakis Center at Northeastern University. And they found that in their study of neighborhoods gaining new transit access between 1990 and 2000, that a significant majority of neighborhoods that gained access had higher than average levels of rent increase and changes in median household income over that time. That speaks to the gentrification pressures and the potential for increased cost burden, particularly amongst low-income renters. And not only is there the relationship to core riders and access to the new transit service, but there's, from an equity perspective, but again, if we are making these very substantial transportation investments, which are quite costly, and in many cases the biggest public investment that a community may see in perhaps a generation, then we want to make sure that you are getting the best bang for your buck from a return on investment perspective as well, in addition to the equity benefits. You'll note that in the two data points furthest to the right as you're looking at the screen is that a substantial minority of neighborhoods actually lagged in public transit use for commuting compared to the metro area as a whole. A majority had increases, but 40% that lagged behind is a pretty substantial minority given the scope of the public investment. And you can also see that the vast majority of neighborhoods actually saw increases in motor vehicle ownership that is potentially tied to, in one part, population growth, but also the increase in median household income. So if we're making these transit investments, but actually not necessarily seeing the transit ridership increase and seeing more congestion on the roads as a result of more auto ownership, then we're not getting the best bang for our buck from a public transit perspective. So we need to make sure that we use equitable TOD as a tool to, again, connect core riders to the transit system. So I would thank everyone for their time, and I'll pass the, again, figuratively speaking, pass the mic over to John, who will talk about the next phase of our research on barriers and best practices.
Great, thanks. Thanks a lot, Mike, and thank you for advancing the slide. Hello again, everyone. Thanks for rejoining us. So some of the barriers to ETOD that we've found, and most of these on this slide won't be a surprise. Single-use zoning that promotes one use per day per hour, not mixing uses. Density limits that reduce the cost efficiency of development near transit. Parking requirements that turn what should be a pedestrian environment into an auto-dominant environment. Similarly with auto orientation, property and development costs that are uniquely high in transit station areas, and infrastructure needs, for instance, trying to convert a park and ride lot to mixed-use development takes a lot of investment on the front end. So let's dig in a little more to some of these. Mike and I structured our research around 4 barriers: adopting proactive, collaborative strategies, breaking down silos to collaborate early and often on integrating investments in transit and affordable housing. Similarly, taking early action to reform plans to thoughtfully lower the combined costs of housing and transportation. Also creating financial products that specifically address financing issues unique to equitable TOD. And finally, improving a site's viability for all development, particularly affordable housing, but really for mixed-use development broadly. Next slide, Mike. Next. So a few proactive strategies that we recommend. Convening cross-sector collaborative groups like the Great Communities Collaborative in Bay Area, Mile High Connects in Denver, the Transformation Alliance in Atlanta, the Purple Line Corridor Coalition just north of DC, and LA Thrives in Los Angeles are great examples of groups that include public sector, private sector, philanthropies, and really just a broad array of stakeholders. Aligning priorities through funding sources like the Qualified Allocation Plan, as well as MPO's transportation improvement programs, and using regulatory tools like station area, including housing ordinances. C would be planning, using planning and data analysis like Center for Neighborhood Technologies Housing and Transportation Analysis, and also with an eye on affirmatively furthering fair housing. Pre-development coordination is important. In San Francisco, the city of San Francisco used a blanket environmental impact review when planning for the T3 light rail. So that allowed not only for the transit project, but also expedited development around it. Again, the collaborative groups, once you have the groups in place, using them for city engagement to promote equity resulting from a transportation project. Community benefits agreements are popular and have been used in Baltimore and around the country. And then finally, typologies. We've seen MARTA in Atlanta has done a great typology, and Capital Metro in Austin has done well too. And here are some images of said Cap Metro typology. Their transit-friendly development guide does well to spell out affordability considerations, connectivity, street character, parking, density, transit service, and community development partnerships. With this one, as well as the one with MARTA, it graphically introduces something that can be a fairly arcane topic. So it brings TOD to the people. Next slide. Number 2, reform plans. So adopting local codes like inclusionary zoning, density bonus, as Mike touched on, discounting public land for public good. Those are some best practices. Adopting state legislation, Massachusetts Chapter 40B requires municipalities to have a certain level of affordability. In Montgomery County, just north of where Mike is sitting now, their moderately priced dwelling unit program has been a model for other counties to follow across the country. And then for reforming parking policies, you can see it at transit agencies like in San Diego, MTS has studied parking utilization and has made the case for redeveloping some parking lots. The city of Sacramento has revised many of its local codes. And in Denver, RTD has promoted what they call the SUMP principles, which is the parking management agreement in Boulder. It's SUMP because it is shared parking space between retail, public use, hotel, residential, and transit riders. Parking is unbundled from commercial and residential rent, thereby reducing the cost of that rent. It's managed to efficiently maximize parking supply, utilization, and transportation demand management, and it's paid to manage demand for spaces, encourage non-car use, and offset maintenance costs of the facility. 3, expanding access to ETOD supportive capital. So here we're talking about creating incentives in existing programs like LIHTC, having a preference for development near transit stations. Also, local affordable housing trusts are useful there. Linking environmental resources like California's cap and trade program, which spins off revenue for equitable transit-oriented development. Providing state-level resources, for instance, Maryland's Sustainable Communities Program, or in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities area, the Livable Communities Act. Utilizing local resources, again, like housing trust funds, as well as special, resource slide. Allocating transportation funds, for example, in the Bay Area, using Surface Transportation Program funding to seed the TOA fund, Transit-Oriented Affordable Housing Fund, which brought in other private investments. You now create a $50 million fund for pre-development and acquisition. And finally, utilizing local resources like TIF and bonding authority. So on the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the Atlanta Beltline. Some of you may be familiar, but the Atlanta Beltline project seeks to transform neighborhoods across the city by redeveloping an existing 22-mile rail corridor with transit service, trails, green space, housing, and art. The City of Atlanta established the Beltline Tax Allocation District to support and finance the initiative, with 15% of revenues supporting the Beltline Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Other cities use TIF innovatively. The City of Dallas is one example, but the Beltline is a great example of a pretty innovative special assessment district expressly for tying transit investment with affordable housing. And finally, number 4, enhancing site access. So this is just a way to make a rather or otherwise unattractive site more attractive. So if the transit agency can promote joint development policies that require affordable housing with flexible holding terms, also assembling land to a more efficient scale that would attract redevelopment. And finally, in weaker markets, there are opportunities to reduce barriers and attract bellwether affordable housing investment. Affordable housing is useful in some ways to be the first to invest in an untested, unproven community. Next slide, Mark. For example, there are 3 examples here. The 303 Artway in Denver will connect a 9.4-acre, 156-unit project to a new train station coming online in early 2016, as well as existing cultural amenities along a 5.5-mile heritage trail over 3 phases that will, give the quickly redeveloping area some identity to its, some recognition of its past, but also some identity going forward. The Wonder Route En Route program is a partnership with MARTA, as well as the Transformation Alliance, which Enterprise co-convenes in Atlanta, to install art in select MARTA stations and again enliven the area. And finally, Baltimore Housing's Vacancy Value program strategically disposes of city-owned properties, streamlines code enforcement to stabilize strong markets, but also partners with developers in weak markets to invest there. And there are other incentives as well, but that's a quick summary then. Okay, so next steps. So as Mike noted, this has been about a year-long research initiative. Some of our research is already posted on this link on the Enterprise Resource Center, including a piece we wrote for CNU for the Congress for New Urbanism event, as well as just a summary of our research and the case-making document. We expect to release this barriers report at Revolution on October 25th, and expect to release a piece on navigating federal regulations by the end of this year. Also, we'll be going around the country, holding symposiums. We have one scheduled for Boston on November 16th, but others toward the end of this year and going into next year. And as a segue, if you would like to have a symposium in your neighborhood, this is how you can find us. Email, phone. We would be happy to talk to you and connect you to our local markets to make this come together even more. So thanks for your time. We will, if we have time, Rebecca, we'd love to hear comments and questions and have some discussion about our research.
Great. Thank you, John and Mike. That was very helpful and informative. If you have questions, please feel free to send them through the question box. Or if you can find the icon, you can raise your hand on the webinar, and I will unmute you so you can ask your question that way, while you are hopefully just choosing among all the questions you want to ask. We will start here in the room. I was wondering, you talked about, so ETOD is about affordable housing linked with transit, but one of the challenges that I know exists is preservation. So existing affordable units, either because they're subsidized or naturally occurring as transit is expanding, and how do we protect those units and make sure they get the benefit of the access that's coming. So just wondering if you could touch on that a little bit more.
Sure. I think the first step is really understanding what's there. I think we talk, by the time, in many cases, by the time we're talking about preservation, the level of property value increase is already accelerated to a degree that we're already starting from behind, and we're having to utilize additional resources, or are unable to utilize resources because the market has just heated up so much that we can't compete for particularly those market rate affordable units. So the big piece is to understand what the current stock and affordability needs are as early in the process as possible. Property value increases can start as soon as the transit investment discussions happen, much less actually breaking ground or opening up. So, and that can, especially when we're talking, it's one thing to identify the potentially expiring subsidized affordable housing. There are existing resources, including the Local Housing Coalition's National Preservation Database has all that information, but it's a bigger task to identify the market rate affordable housing that we don't have any control over. So there's a few steps that can be taken. In Denver, in Denver, there's the Denver Regional TOD Fund. In the Bay Area, there's, John mentioned, the Bay Area Transit-Oriented Affordable Housing Fund, which were specifically set up to finance the acquisition of properties for affordable housing near transit. Now, some of them could be undeveloped parcels, but many of them were existing properties. So having that capital resource, in both cases, they were seeded with public investment that were able to leverage private and philanthropic dollars on top of that. And that also was allowed the development of that capital source, because of that public investment, was able to have terms and conditions, both in terms of interest rate and hold periods, et cetera, that were more conducive to a transit-served property where the new service may not actually be coming for a longer period of time. You may not want to redevelop immediately. So there are a number of policies you can put into place as well, in addition to the capital solutions. There's many jurisdictions have instituted the tenant opportunity to purchase laws that give tenants the opportunity of, within either expiring subsidized or market rate multifamily housing, the opportunity to match a private sector bid, and in many cases a core and very important element of this is to be able to assign your right as the tenant to an experienced developer who is going to keep those units as affordable. Because tenants obviously often don't have development capacity within the building necessarily. They may, but not necessarily. So there are a number of policy steps that can be taken, but the first step is to understand what the actual need is and conduct that needs assessment. And you can pick whatever relevant policy or financial tools are relevant to your unique circumstances after starting that process.
No, that's great. That's very helpful. And I think that is part of the challenge, is having the partnerships in place, because, as you mentioned, the property value change can happen much sooner than you anticipate, just by talking about transit investment, because it is such a massive infrastructure piece that does change a neighborhood. But the needs assessment makes sense. What's there that you need to preserve? So I'm still hoping people are going to submit some of their own questions, but I have another one. I'm curious about the role of the state government. I know John mentioned state inclusionary housing laws or affordable housing requirements like 40B in Massachusetts, but in terms of other policies or actions the state could take to encourage more TOD and ETOD specifically, because while it's very much a local conversation and that's where the action happens, some states and localities are, more progressive than others around this idea. So things that the state could do to maybe support local governments to think about it, if they're not already.
So, there's a lot of work that states can do. The state, as holder of resources in many cases, this Denver, in the case of the Denver Regional TOD Fund, the state's Housing Finance Agency was one of the investors in that fund, so they can provide capital. Again, it's sort of not politically tenable in all states, but as you mentioned, the 40B law in Massachusetts, Connecticut has a similar policy that is sort of a statewide inclusionary policy, if you will. In many cases, it's about enabling the local jurisdictions to do to utilize their powers and their resources. You have different governance structures in different states. In some states, the local municipality has the power, all powers that aren't expressly reserved for the state, or conversely, other states, in other states, such as, again, the state of Virginia, where I live, the municipal government only has the powers that are expressly given to them by the state government. So, you'll have circumstances where there are restrictions on using tax increment financing or a tax allocation district, as in the Atlanta Beltline, because they don't have the local municipal authority. You will have circumstances where, in some cases, the state hasn't authorized municipalities to institute an inclusionary zoning ordinance or an inclusionary housing policy. So in many cases, the real action at the state level, aside from providing financing, is for them to open up the policy toolbox for the local municipalities. And unfortunately, in some states, you occasionally see backsliding. There are efforts to ban inclusionary zoning in many states. Many states have been successful in doing so. Arizona actually passed a ban on inclusionary zoning, even though no municipality was thinking about instituting it. Texas actually just passed a law that that overrode any jurisdiction's policies that would ban source of income discrimination. So basically saying you can't refuse to lease to an otherwise eligible tenant just because they have, for example, a housing choice voucher. Austin had a policy such as that, and the Texas government overrode that and said that that sort of policy is not legal in the state. So you can have policies that backslide, but you could also take enabling action. The Commonwealth of Virginia actively passed at Arlington, Virginia's request, passed legislation allowing it to adopt an inclusionary housing policy. And then just quickly, one final note, and forgive me if we mentioned this earlier for redundancy, but there's the issue of qualified allocation plans and making sure that there are provisions in your QAP around neighborhood characteristics and transit access.
And I would only add, Maryland and New Jersey stand out in some ways. Mike makes great points about enabling local government to take measures. But in Maryland, and also in Massachusetts under Governor Romney, you have super cabinets where cabinet level sectors come together, and again, to my earlier point about coordinating early and often and breaking down silos, discussing, just being in the same room to discuss shared priorities and putting in place programs that will codify that integration. So in Maryland, the Sustainable Communities Program provides funding to local cities and towns to redevelop station areas and more broadly than that. But also in doing so, a sustainable community designation also provides for Maryland Department of Transportation TOD designation, which again opens up doors for funding, as well as some TIF authority, so just greater allowances. And New Jersey is similar. Their Transit Village initiative enables cities and towns to access funding and streamline permitting and some technical assistance that they otherwise wouldn't have received. So aligning incentives and programs in addition to the QAP, which Mike just mentioned, seems to be one way that states can get ahead of this.
No, that's a great point, John. Thanks. So I want to be respectful of time, but just one last question. I was hoping you could elaborate a little bit on the third part of your research around navigating federal policies, and just give us a sense of what that's going to look at. Is it going to be like the capital investment grants, the new starts, or HUD programs, Sustainable Communities Initiative at the federal level? What's kind of the scope of that?
So it'll primarily focus on navigating Department of Transportation policy. There's been the ongoing and accurate narrative about political gridlock in Washington in the last however many years you want to define it. But one of the areas where there's been a significant amount of positive progress has been in policies surrounding the transit-oriented development through both HUD and the Department of Transportation. The HUD had its Sustainable Communities grants because those were sort of ended up being just a couple rounds, and it doesn't look like there's going to be ongoing policy. This latest research project will probably not spend too much time addressing that. But where there has also been a lot of action is with, as you mentioned, the Capital Investment Grant Program. For those that haven't followed that program very closely, in 2013, they adopted new program guidance that changed the way that applicants for new transit capital were evaluated. Capital Investment Grant Program is the primary competitive funding source for new transit investments from the Federal Transit Administration. And it is a very sought-after resource. And for the first time that I'm aware of, there may be examples that I've missed, but I don't think so, federal transportation policy explicitly addressed the importance of affordable housing. Applicants for capital investment grant funding will now be rated on the extent to which they identify affordable housing needs and take proactive actions to support affordable housing. Now, one element of this is that it comes to the point that we've made a couple of times about coordination. A lot of the methods for supporting affordable housing preservation and creation are outside of the purview of the transit agency. So to address this rating factor in a very robust way will require the type of innovative interagency coordination that we're calling for in our second report that we'll be releasing next month. There are plenty of examples of that happening, and there's plenty of examples of that type of coordination, and it's a matter of, figuring out what FTA is looking for and helping them navigate it. And as the affordable housing sector, working with transit agencies that may not be as familiar with real estate development and to a greater extent may not be as familiar with the nuances of affordable housing development about what they should do, who they should partner with, and what they can do that's within their own control. So that's one of the things we'll be focusing on. We'll also be focusing on joint development regulations, also through FTA and Department of Transportation, because that applies beyond just the capital investment grant program, because joint development is the development of real estate on FTA-funded property where there's some sort of, FTA has a financial interest in that parcel, and therefore a set of regulations apply. So that can be in conjunction with the capital investment grant program, where it is, what you do with your joint development in that context does allow a transit agency to somewhat control their own destiny as far as their affordable housing policies and plans. But it extends beyond that to legacy properties as well. How do we navigate those rules and regulations to support affordable housing development near transit? There are some opportunities there. There are also some tricky areas that we have to navigate. So there's been also new guidance from the Department of Transportation and the Federal Transit Administration on joint development. And so this publication will also focus on helping helping housing advocates, transit agencies, local jurisdictions navigate this towards more equitable TOD.
That's great. Thank you. I just wanted to highlight that because I think as a houser, understanding how some of the programs work at DOT is very challenging. Different acronyms, different metrics.
And vice versa, too.
Yeah. So ways to build the bridges, I think, will be really helpful going forward, especially since we do have this opportunity with new things in place that we want to really make successful between the housing and transportation fields. So I think that will also be a really valuable report. With that, I will just thank Mike and John for being with us today and sharing their research. Do reach out to them with your questions if you have more specific questions you wanted to take offline. They are very open to your feedback and what you're interested in learning about this topic. So please do take advantage of them and share the recording with other folks who might be interested.
And thank you for having us.
And with that, I will just want to run through a couple quick things from NHC before I let you go. Starting with next Thursday, we are hosting a webinar on the Clean Power Plan. The EPA has put out their final rule, and so we want to help housing stakeholders understand what's in the final rule, what it means for housing stakeholders, and how to get involved in your state's planning process, as well as some multifamily energy efficiency programs that might be good options for state plans. So we'll have speakers from the Natural Resources Defense Council, the National Housing Trust, ACEEE, and the Green Building Council. So it's next Thursday from 3 to 4:30, and we'll send out that registration information. And lastly, I want to plug our upcoming conference in November 5th and 6th in New Orleans. We have mobile workshops with Enterprise and Habitat to look at their projects in the city the morning of November 5th. And then we have a lot of great sessions on public safety and community development, property management strategies, RAD deals, fair housing, and health and housing. So really great content. And through Tuesday, you can get a 10% discount on your registration fee if you use the code RNTF, for Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force. So please take advantage of that discount if you're planning to attend. And the hotel deadline is also coming up quickly on October 15th. So just wanted to raise those for you. And because we are having this conference at the beginning of November, there will be no separate task force meeting like we're having today. So you will see that canceled on your calendar after today. So just a heads up about that. So please reach out if you have questions about the conference or the webinar. And again, please continue to invite people to the task force who might find it valuable. And with that, I will release you back into your day. Thanks so much for joining us.